100 days without a budget, 100 days of failed negotiations, empty promises, slash payments, and unsuccessful deals. Hundreds of thousands of the state's most vulnerable people are already affected, and it doesn't look like Illinois leaders are anywhere near a deal to fund the government. Tonight we get some answers as to why on a special presentation of State of Affairs 100 Days.
You're watching State of Affairs 100 Days on News Channel 20.
Good evening and welcome to State of Affairs. I'm Jordan Abudayyeh.
And I'm Adam Rife. Over the next half hour, we'll take a look at how we got to this point, how the optimism of a first-time governor gave way to party politics and business as usual.
And we'll look at the long road ahead and what it will take to finally get a deal done. We begin with a look back at an unproductive legislative session.
In January, the first Republican governor in Illinois in more than a decade was sworn in, and Governor Bruce Rauner had big plans for the state.
Our state must become competitive again. In the weeks ahead, I'll be asking the legislature to work with me to pass a comprehensive jobs and economic package that will get Illinois working again.
That package became known as the Turnaround Agenda, a lengthy list of pro-business, anti-union reforms aimed at bringing businesses back to the state. Governor Rauner invited party leaders to meet just one day after assuming the office.
We all agreed to work together to solve some problems.
A lot of enthusiasm, a lot of bipartisan feeling of optimism and working together.
Then the turnaround tour began. Governor Rauner traveling the state, explaining how his plans would help the economy, often referring to PowerPoint presentations along the way. The promise of bipartisanship started cracking there, as Democrats claimed the reforms went against their basic political principles, but they promised to at least try to find common ground.
He has asked us to start to form working groups, which we're going to do. But again, it is really not directly related to the budget in any way, and we have to pass a budget here, and we're going to do it in a bipartisan fashion.
In order to pass a balanced budget, both sides agreed the state would need more revenue, but Governor Rauner refuses to sign a tax increase without reforms first. The last day of regularly scheduled session came after Democrats passed their own spending plan just days before.
The reform bills that he introduced contained compromises and suggestions from the Democrats. They were summarily voted down on partisan roll calls, and we come back on the last day of session to hear, hey, Republican governor ought to just raise taxes.
The House and Senate went into continuous session for the summer. Governor Rauner sending a stern warning.
We're going to have a rough coming weeks because these insiders will not give up their power easily, but we will not back down.
And that brings us to July 1st, day one of the 2016 fiscal year without a state budget. Now, Jordan's going to walk us through the budget impasse, and I'll introduce the major players. Jordan?
Adam, the impact was minimal at the outset because payments from the state had already been delayed for vendors for years. So vendors didn't really notice much of a change. But then on day 17, the Supreme Court ruled they would stay out of the legal battle over state worker pay, solidifying a lower court's decision that workers would be paid despite the lack of a budget.
That decision took away some of the urgency to get a deal done, as state workers would not miss any paychecks. The talk then shifted to increasing revenue to balance the budget, but that argument fell largely along party lines. Here's Governor Bruce Rauner talking about revenue.
It would be a huge mistake for Illinois to only raise taxes at the present time. We would shake the confidence in the business community, in homeowners, and we will continue to chase our tail down in decline, as we have been for a number of years. When somebody might say, well, our points are extreme, I would respond, maybe they are extreme common sense.
Lawmakers returned to Springfield on a weekly basis as Democrats attempted to pass piecemeal spending bills. Though the state was functioning without spending power, the courts were mandating spending on what they deemed were essential state services. On day 48 of the impasse, August 17th, a House committee met to try and get a grasp on how much money was needed to pay the consent decrees and court orders.
Yeah, but getting answers was difficult. Jordan, you asked Speaker Madigan at the time just how long the state could function under the court orders. Here's that exchange.
How long do you think the state can sustain this spending before we finally run out of money?
I don't have the answer to that question, but you probably know that Representative Bradley in the Revenue Committee has been taking testimony over several weeks, trying to come to a determination precisely where is the governor on his commitments to spend money.
Thanks to last year's temporary tax increase, the state had trimmed a ballooning backlog of bills. But after the tax expired and without spending authority, that backlog shot up again this year. On day 71, September 9th, Comptroller Leslie Munger held a press conference to warn of the dire consequences of not passing a budget.
$8.5 billion by the end of the year if a deal isn't done. And that backlog grows every day. Here's Comptroller Munger imploring lawmakers to get a deal done as soon as possible.
We find ourselves in the position when checks are being written, directed by the courts, there is no consideration given to how much money actually we have in our state's bank accounts. This is clearly a recipe for disaster, and the longer that this continues, the harder it will be for our state to regain its financial footing.
But it was the very next day that Governor Rauner vetoed a temporary spending plan that had been passed by Democrats earlier this summer.
Listen to the debate from the Senate floor over that spending bill.
This puts us on a path to basically just cementing in an out of balance unconstitutional budget. Let's stop doing this month at a time and get down to the real business of compromising on the fundamental reforms necessary to make Illinois great again.
The previous speaker, I gave him an opportunity to file legislation or file amendments to the budget, has not done that for a month and a half. There's been no action on the part over there. We are taking action. We are being responsible. We are doing what's necessary in order to keep the budget afloat.
The House and Senate are still in continuous session, although the last time lawmakers were in Springfield was about 2 weeks ago. As we hit the 100-day mark, both the House and Senate aren't expected back before October 20th.
This week, the governor and legislative leaders have come out swinging, accusing the other side of refusing to compromise and playing political games. Governor Rauner again calling on Democrats to pass his reforms on or pass a tax increase on their own. But in the State House, this State House especially, nothing is that easy. When we come back on State of Affairs 100 Days, we sit down with some of the organizations that are trying to keep their doors open and provide services to the people who need them most.
And later, we'll talk to lawmakers and reporters who covered the State House to get their take on the negotiations. You're watching State of Affairs 100 Days. Welcome back to State of Affairs 100 Days. We're joined now by Vicki Smith of the Illinois Domestic Violence Coalition and Russ Bonanno of the Autism Project to talk about the impact the budget cuts are already having on people who need services from the state every day. Now, we heard earlier today, we had Representative Durkin talking about, he's the minority leader in the House, talking about how Democrats are using organizations like your guys' as human shields. What is your response to that? Do you feel like you're being trotted out as a human shield amid the impasse?
I think that's rhetoric that doesn't help. I think we're all in this trying to figure out how to keep our doors open every day. And we as advocates are busy talking about what this really does. What's the human factor? What's going on here? Standing up and pointing your fingers at each other day after day after day is not helping anybody. It is everybody's responsibility to come to work, do their job, and get us a budget that is going to support the needs of people.
Russ, Vicki talks about the human factor. Let's talk about the actual people that are being hurt by some of this negotiations. We talk about rhetoric, and do the lawmakers understand that real people are being impacted every day? What is that like for your organization?
Well, we've spoken with legislators on both sides of the aisle in both chambers. So I do believe they understand the impact that this is having on children and families across the state. Several of our centers have closed already, unable to stay open. Others will be closing within the next 1 to 3 months. So it's having a definite impact. We've been talking about it really since March with legislators.
Vicki, October, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, a month where we're supposed to be highlighting all of the programs and help that people can get here in the state. What sort of impacts are you seeing statewide because of the impasse?
Well, we've had one agency close in Southern Illinois. We've had another agency that's made dramatic reduction in the availability of emergency shelter beds. They're all busy doing the things that they do every year in October: candlelight vigils, luncheons, rallies, and Take Back the Night rallies. They continue to do that because the awareness is important. But all of them every day are making decisions about how much longer, what staff are they going to have to lay off, which staff directly relates to services. You can't have services if you don't have staff. So it's a day-to-day basis. Some of them probably will begin to reduce significantly after the end of this month. We've now gone almost 4 months without any significant resources. So they're not hiring, they're cutting back. Administration is cutting back there, so direct services is available, and they're making those decisions on a day-to-day basis.
We'll wrap up with asking each of you briefly. Let's talk best case scenario. If, and we know it won't happen, but if lawmakers were to pass a budget tomorrow, does that solve all your problems, or is this something that's going to take a while to dig out of? We'll start with you, Russ.
I would say it's definitely going to take a while. You know, we had centers that closed beginning in July. And we work with people who are experts, who are experienced in autism. There's a high demand for that service. So it's going to be difficult to replace a lot of the people who've lost their jobs, to bring centers back up. Some centers are even losing their office space.
Vicki, you're nodding. It seems like the same case for you.
Yes, of course. When you have to lay people off or when you have to reduce services, you're not immediately going to be able to ramp those back up tomorrow. It's just the fact, let's say they do pass a budget tomorrow and the governor signs it. It's still a process of getting all of the records taken care of, getting records from the Department of Human Services over to the comptroller, getting the checks, making sure the money's in the bank. You know, that's the other issue. Even if the contracts were established, if the money's not in the bank to pay it, it doesn't matter. That we've been in those kinds of situations just a few years ago. So none of it's going to be immediate. But the longer they drag it out, the harder it is for them to keep their doors open or to start back once they do that.
We appreciate your time. Thanks and best of luck.
Thank you.
Still to come on State of Affairs 100 Days, a roundtable discussion with two first-term members of the House. What they say it will take to pass a budget next.
And then we sit down with two reporters who covered the Capitol inside and out. They'll tell us if the messaging from lawmakers is making an impact. You're watching State of Affairs 100 Days.
Welcome back to State of Affairs 100 Days. We're joined now in the studio by Republican Representative Tim Butler of Springfield and Republican Representative Avery Bourne of Raymond. We do want to mention that we did try as hard as we could to get a Democrat to join us here for the opposing view. However, none were available. That's all right. We're going to start here with the two of you, both first-time lawmakers, both appointed earlier this session. I imagine it's got to be different than what you expected, obviously, coming into a first session. Representative Bourne, we'll start with you. What has this inaction been like for you on the floor?
It's been more than frustrating. I knew the legislature was broken, and that's why I wanted to get involved, but this has been beyond what I expected, and really it's tough to go back and tell my constituents how much inaction there is and really give them much hope.
What, as you say, frustration with the inaction, what can you do as a first-term lawmaker? You're obviously not in leadership meetings, few people are, but what can you do to kind of get the ball rolling or at least comfort the people back home in your district?
Yes, I'm in constant communication with the leadership, asking them what's going on, and then trying to be a really easy channel to my constituents of telling them exactly what's going on, answering their questions, and being really accessible for them.
Representative Butler, how about you?
You know, as someone who came from congressional work where I worked for members of Congress that work together in a bipartisan manner, it has been very frustrating to be in the chamber and not get anything done. I think to your point, Adam, about what can freshman lawmakers do, we have a lot of freshmen. We have 14 members, Republican freshmen. So I think, you know, those of us who are new can still kind of band together, hopefully, and we're a significant presence in the Capitol. So I'm hopeful that we'll continue to work together. It is very frustrating, though. There's not much talking going on between the Speaker and the Governor's office and the President, and that really needs to happen. It needs to happen soon.
As we reached out to people on social media to talk about the budget impasse, it seems like people are overwhelmingly frustrated with lawmakers, and they're not in the political process every day, but you guys have been in session around 13 days out of this 100, and they see the empty Capitol and they say, this is frustrating. If I don't show up to my job and I don't get anything done and I don't produce results, I don't get to keep my job. So is this hard for you guys as new lawmakers to deal with that and deal with that frustration?
Well, there's certainly not much for us to do. We've seen when we have been in session that we've had these extended sessions on these committees of the whole that really haven't produced anything. And as you said earlier, I mean, really a lot of this happens on the leadership level and negotiations and discussions that go on the leadership level. And so you know, there really isn't much of a need for us to be in the Capitol, but it certainly gives a bad, it's a bad impression of the public. I mean, it looks like we're not working. Even though Avery and I are out running around our districts, it certainly is easy for the public to say, how come you're not doing your job?
To that point, Representative Bourne, you've sponsored legislation that would call for term limits for lawmakers in leadership positions. That's something that Governor Rauner made no secret he was running on when he campaigned for governor. How do you compromise? It's no secret Republicans want to get Speaker Madigan out of the House. It's been 30-something years. But it's also an issue in Republican leadership of having a stalemate for the past several years. So what is that like, trying to talk as a freshman lawmaker, looking at leadership that's maybe not doing their part? Would that be fair to say?
I think term limits for leadership are a really good idea because as voters, they get to choose who's representing them, but they don't get to choose who's setting the agenda in Springfield and who's choosing or not choosing to talk and have discussions on how to fix Illinois. And so I think leadership term limits are a start, but also it is really concerning that freshman lawmakers get such little of a voice when it's so leadership centric. So really there should be more communication and more involvement of all legislators.
Representative Butler, you brought the Twizzlers on the floor. How are you trying to reach across the aisle? I mean, obviously the Twizzlers are a big hit. I mean, you got Democrats coming over to say hi.
Well, I think one of the things that we must do as legislators is reach across the aisle and work together. So I spend a lot of time talking to Democrats, whether it's on the floor or calling them up and texting them to find out what's going on. I think you have to build those relationships. I think eventually, if you build those relationships, you're going to see positive developments take place. This can't go on forever, and hopefully by developing those relationships, maybe something will bubble up. We've seen some talk of that this week, and maybe that's where we go, where some of the people actually reach across the aisle outside of the leadership and try to bring something forward.
One word from each of you as we wrap up here. What's your estimate on what month this gets wrapped up?
You know, I'm pessimistic. I'm into
sometime in 2016. Representative Bourne?
I'm the optimistic one. I think end of November, before Christmas.
Okay, that's still 2 months away. So appreciate both of you coming on. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us. Still ahead here on State of Affairs 100 Days, Amanda Vinicky, State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio, and Bernie Schoenberg of the State Journal Register join us to talk about how the budget impasse has been covered and how the messages from lawmakers are being received. You are watching State of Affairs 100 Days. Stay with us.
Welcome back to State of Affairs 100 Days. Joined now in the studio by Amanda Vinicky, Bureau Chief at WIS Public Radio, and Bernie Schoenberg, political columnist at the State Journal Register. Let's jump right into the news yesterday. Governor Rauner building a speech yesterday, calling on lawmakers, saying enough is enough, now is the time. Didn't land too well. Amanda, we'll start with you. What do you think the reaction was around the state to that speech?
The reaction was a lot of, what was the buildup here? Nothing has changed. He basically reiterated the same points that we've heard from him previously, adding on, however, that he's frustrated, that this is outrageous. What he, of course, didn't include in that was his role in the outrageous situation that is going on. The fact that we're having this program 100 days without a budget, and he's the new governor. He's the one that's supposed to lead. That was the reaction from Democrats.
Bernie, we also heard today from the governor, and he said this isn't personal. This isn't a personal political vendetta against anyone, although he's spent the majority of these 100 days and even beforehand saying that it's Mike Madigan's fault and the politicians that he controls. What sort of atmosphere do we have right now?
Well, it's pretty poisoned, and I think the fact that the governor spent nearly $1 million after the session ended, or right about that time, doing advertisements with those grainy pictures of Mike Madigan. The campaign is over, and this is the guy that you want to do a deal with you, and then you're going to kind of use advertising to insult him. He also said some personal things, both about Madigan and Cullerton, when he had met the press outside the mansion, on the mansion grounds one day, talking about how they make money if property taxes are high because of their businesses.
Accusations that could be illegal if they were actually...
Right, and that's because they're both lawyers that help people get lower assessments on their buildings, the two leaders of the House and Senate. But to say things like that at this time, as Madigan would say, is not helpful toward reaching a solution.
Let's go inside baseball for a moment. 13 days, as we've counted, they've been in session during these 100 of the impasse. Yet, you guys on the beat are there every day looking for those stories, trying to keep people informed. What kind of challenge is that for you, trying to keep people up to speed on what really are non-stories much of the time?
You know, I think the challenge is really explaining how and why we are in this situation, because it is unprecedented. Illinois has never been through this, and it makes everybody, I think, just want to put their hands to their heads and scream. It is a situation that is inexplicable. People say, this is common sense. Why can't they just get along? And there aren't any good and easy answers to it. The other question everybody wants to know, when is it going to end? And we can't answer that. I don't think that anybody is able to do so, but that's as frustrating for citizens. I promise it's frustrating for reporters who want to have answers to those questions as well.
Bernie, you've been covering politics a long time, so explain, is this something that we've seen before? Is this a new kind of gridlock? Is it different from the past?
It is a different gridlock. I mean, when when Jim Edgar was new and Mike Madigan was new, the horrible situation lasted, I think, 17 days. And Rod Blagojevich, it lasted, I think, into early August, but we are now way beyond that. This governor got elected thinking that even though he didn't talk much about union stuff in the general election, after talking about it a lot in the primary, came out strongly to go after collective bargaining rights, that kind of thing, after the election. And he is just set on getting that done, but we have a Democratic legislature. So he seems to want to do what Scott Walker did in Wisconsin, which is erode union rights through legislation, but we have a Democratic legislature. Scott Walker had a Republican one. So it is unprecedented, and it doesn't seem to be moving.
And that's, I think, another complication is that a lot of the issues that this gridlock is focused on are really only tangential to the budget. The governor says they are related because they'll help Illinois become more competitive long term, but
they don't have to do with the spending.
Budget. Exactly.
Right.
And so that's another part that's really difficult to explain. People say, pass a budget, pay for things. What's the problem?
But to wrap things up here, yes or no, does this get done by the end of the year?
No.
That's a telling hesitation, Amanda.
I'm going to say no without any hesitation.
All right, that's difficult. Thank you guys for coming on.
Bernie and Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. And obviously we've hit 100 days and this could go on for 100 more. Who knows if that happens? That'll be a couple days after Governor Bruce Rauner's 1-year anniversary of being sworn in. Not a good way to start the second year of your governorship.
You've been watching State of Affairs 100 Days. Thanks for watching.